So I work in the Agricultural Development Economics Division, and until the end of September, I was following the National Food Policy Capacity Strengthening Program, which is a program based in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, in the Ministry of Food, and it's supporting the Food Planning and Monitoring Unit in its functions. And the main functions of the FPMU are to provide technical advice to the government on food security issues, and also to support interministerial coordination around the food security policy, the government's food security policy, and the country investment plan. So this Food Planning and Monitoring Unit has been very heavily involved in monitoring the implementation of the country investment plan for food security, nutrition, and agriculture, which is a plan of probably Tommaso and Benoit and Alberto, who've been involved in it, mentioned it. It's a plan of around $11 billion for food security, of which about 50% of the funds have already been mobilized by government and the donors. So there's huge political visibility around this country investment plan, which has been really fundamental. Someone mentioned earlier the importance of institutionalization. I think that's an important aspect, but also that there is political visibility around the country investment plan. In this case, it was for food security. Now, same thing for the environment and climate change plan that you're talking about, you're working on. The very fundamental driver in Bangladesh has been the high level of visibility that is being behind the food security plan, which has also encouraged interministerial collaboration, because there is so much visibility. All the different ministries feel accountable for this. There is very high commitment from the Ministry of Food. The Minister of Food asks on a very regular basis what is the progress in implementation of the plan. There's a yearly monitoring process, and the different ministries participate in this because the ministers heading the different ministries that are involved in the country investment plan attach great importance to it. So in some way, I think it would be important to try and find levers that give you high level visibility to the plans that you're working on. It's not sufficient for there to make sense for the country, to make logical sense. In some way, there needs to be buy-in. A big factor in this, in the case of Bangladesh, was that the USAID, at the time it was 2010, USAID came to Bangladesh, said we're willing to invest in food security through our Feed the Future initiative, but there needs to be an investment plan. And that came after the crisis of high food prices. So also the government has raised its interest and attention to food security. It was a few factors came together when they were very favorable. The high food prices ended up being something. It was detrimental to food security, but positive in the longer term, because it raised the interest in food security by both the government and the donors. Then you were mentioning the importance of results orientation. I think, well, definitely that's there. It's important to know what you need to do, where you want to get to, and how to get there. But I don't think it's enough. I find it in our work internally, even in FAO, unless the right incentives, unless people have the incentives for reaching those results, it doesn't make much difference whether the results are there or not. So it's important to understand the incentive structure. In the support that we were providing to the FPMU, we provided support in results-based management. That involved sending people on training on results-based management. So the managers of the Food Planning and Monitoring Unit received training in India. And then we provided support on results-based planning for the Food Planning and Monitoring Unit. But we found after 4 years, we realized, well, maybe this approach, results-based management approach, is a little bit foreign to a public sector agency. Even in FAO, we meet these challenges where you try to introduce results-based management, and then it's like, so what? If I don't achieve the results, nothing will change. If they achieve them, nothing changes personally. So it's important to understand what drives people's performance, which is not necessarily achieving the results. Then on the learning process, you mentioned, I think that's very important. it's something which we probably didn't do enough of together with the food planning and monitoring unit. We did it internally as a project at the end of each year when we had to write the work plan for the project. That was the opportunity for reflecting a bit on what has happened, what have we achieved, how can we work better, what are some of the changes we should make. But I think there is a need to really set up a mechanism through which that takes place. That's something we hadn't done, and something that we realized again towards the end of the project, thinking things through, realized we should have done more of this among ourselves and also with the government staff. On the information uptake, I think what you were mentioning was important on the communication aspect, not only generating knowledge, but making sure that it's disseminated, that there is access to the knowledge. But also something else that the government made very clear to us, which I think is important, is the need for more constant dialogue to facilitate the uptake of knowledge. So one thing we were doing was to commission research. Basically, we were together with the government, we drafted the term, we identified the research issues, policy research issues, then we wrote the terms of reference, consulted the government on these, and launched tenders for the research, which was commissioned to national research institutions. And then we had presentations of the findings. The intention was through the presentation of the findings and preparing policy briefs that this would facilitate the uptake. Something the government has said is we need more dialogue throughout the whole process of, in this case it was the research, but I think in any other knowledge generation process there needs to be more dialogue on what are the emerging findings, what does that mean for policy making. In many of the research projects that were commissioned, there were the findings and the policy implications were very simplistic. Decision makers found them difficult to adopt because it wasn't taking into account the complexity of decision making, which Marco was referring to, where you have many different factors to take into account. It's not only what scientifically makes sense, but there's a whole political economy. You have commitments at the international level, at the national level. Is more forests necessarily better, or in some cases you could be providing space to industry? So there are many different factors to take into account, and I think that's important also when communicating research findings or findings from the monitoring process, to take into account the complexity of the decision-making process. And then I think also going back to the point on performance and leadership, we found a massive difference in the performance of the food planning and monitoring unit when an very effective leader, Nasser Farid, started heading the agency. Before that, there was a leadership vacuum, and we struggled even in our capacity development efforts. It ended up us, the project, doing the work for the government. But once Nasser Farid, very effective leader, came in, he started saying, no, my agency needs to take over these functions, these roles, started distributing the responsibilities within his own agency to perform different tasks, and that made a huge difference in improving the performance. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for any questions you might have for myself or for Marco.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your very good presentation and